put AI and robots together. It's Skynet. We're there.
Yeah.
You should have listened to Arnold.
Yeah. You ever have a chef throw a plate or a pot at you before? Imagine if a robot was doing it. That would be,
I think it'd be a
would be
little bit more
terrifying.
dangerous.
Welcome to the Ignite Culinary 360 podcast. I'm Chef Robert.
I'm Chef Luke.
And I'm Chef Ryan. And today we have a very fun, exciting guest, Chef Nick with Bargreen. He's been with Bargreen for 8 years, and he kind of is in a similar role that we are in, that we kind of talk about a lot, but his is more of a manufacturer side. They sell like all the equipment. Fantastic guy. He was a really big and helpful support for me when I first moved out here and getting into this new role with this industry. Let's go ahead and get him on here.
Wait a minute. Is Nick there with you now?
Welcome to the Ignite podcast. Chef Nick, thank you so much for being here today and taking the time to chat with us.
Happy to be here.
Ryan, you look nervous. You can't stop fidgeting.
I know. I'm so nervous today. I don't know why. I'm like starstruck.
I think it's the battle of the beards. That's why. I think you're feeling very like...
But Nick's beard is way better in person than mine.
I don't agree with that. You're just very full.
Right.
So I kind of would just start it off of kind of tell us about your life and how you got into cooking and how you ended up where you're kind of at now.
Sure. Folks often ask me how I ended up in the business. And so, I'd always kind of had an affinity for it. I tell the story of it all started with Charlie Brown, if you can believe that.
All right.
Yeah, I know, right? So as a little kid, one Christmas, my sister got a cookbook for Christmas, and it was a Charlie Brown cookbook. And I was a huge Charlie Brown fan. It was like, I think I was like 6 or 7. And so I was so jealous of the fact that she got this cookbook because every page had a recipe and every recipe had a cartoon.
Yeah.
Nice.
Obviously, they were pulling them from wherever they were pulling them from. And so, but I was enamored with this cookbook because I got to look and see the cartoons. And then, of course, there's recipes next to it. So I'm like looking at those going, oh, well, what's going on here? And and my sister was super generous in allowing me to kind of be a part of it. She wasn't as interested in the cooking part of it as I was, but my mother actually had a surgery. And so she was kind of convalescing at home. And so my grandmothers had kind of been taking turns watching. We had 3 kids in our family. And so was watching us kids. And so I had been talking about this cookbook and one of my grandmothers was there. And she says, well, do you want to make the recipe that's in this cookbook? And the ones I was interested in, I said, oh my gosh, I would love to do that. And so she goes, okay, well, let's do it. So we got all the ingredients together, and it was basically for these little jelly tarts. And so you had to make like a pie dough, and then you took jelly and put it in there and folded them over and then baked them in the oven. And it was pretty simple and straightforward.
Oh, wow.
But for a 6 or 7 year old, it was a lot of work. It wasn't something I was going to be doing on my own. So grandma was there helping me.
Yeah.
So it's a family story now because making those little jelly tarts, I destroyed that kitchen. I destroyed it.
Flour everywhere, jelly on the floor.
My grandmother has long since passed, but literally it was like the flour and the hair and the sweat, and the counters were all a mess. But I was like in heaven just doing all this, and so I kind of never looked back after that. So I was always the one in our family to definitely be adventurous in the kitchen, ask my mom, how do you make this? How do you make that? I was never afraid of taking a pan and cooking something, even at a young age. And so my mom encouraged that. And then, of course, as I got older, my sister, once again, my older sister had gotten a job working at a local, it's funny, the place that she started working, it's called the Big Bun Drive-In. And so it was this independently owned mom and pop burger place. Didn't have a dining room. It was literally 2 drive-thrus. And so she had gotten a job there. And at this point, I just wanted a job. I'd been delivering papers forever. I hated it. And so I finally asked her, I was 15, almost 16. And I said to her, do you think that they would hire me? And she goes, well, let me ask. And so she came back and said, yeah, they want to talk to you. So I went in there and I loved it. I continued on. So for 5 years during high school and college, at least for the first couple of years of college, I continued to cook. And the honesty with this place is, and it's still around, and I still go back And of course, now I'm the old guy that stands at the walk-up window, and I'm like going, "Hey, how's everybody doing?" All these kids back there, and,
Who's this weird guy?
45 years ago, and
Back in the day, I'll show you how to do that better.
but anyway, but the interesting thing about it is, I always liken my my career to beginning at that place, because I learned so much about every aspect of food service. I mean, literally, I'm making burgers, right? But I learned about food cost and inventory, and I learned about how to have a assembly line, and how to control process, and and kind of organize orders in your head, and all of the things that we all learn when we're either in school or in jobs. It was learned at this burger place. And then I moved to Seattle. At that time I was a kitchen manager for a company of restaurants. They had at that time like 21 different restaurants in all across the U.S. actually, and it was called. They're not around anymore, although I think there might still be a couple that are still open. They are called the Rusty Pelican, and it was a seafood restaurant.
Oh,
gosh, there was one in Arizona. There was one. I don't think we had one in Denver, but we had one in Chicago, and they had them all up the West Coast for sure. There was, and it was seafood, high-end seafood restaurants. Once again, it was really funny because I didn't have any formal training, but I had this strange ability that I didn't know what I didn't know.
Right.
I was just powering through, but I was learning so much about fresh seafood and logistics, and once again, kind of reinforcing the inventory and the business side of the restaurant business. So now I'm working at a fine dining restaurant, and I'm able to kind of take the things even that I learned from the burger place and kind of apply them to this larger facility. Now I'm overseeing a staff of like, I think it was about 15 to 20 other cooks. And so, once again, it was just kind of process of kind of figuring that all out.
okay.
The next step from my process was, and once again, I didn't know what I didn't know. And somebody said to me, "Oh, well, you need to get a job as a sous chef." And I was like, "I don't even know what that is."
That sounds fancy.
So I went and applied for a job as a sous chef, and the woman that actually the chef that actually ended up giving me that next job, I'm still super close with. She's one of my mentors from over the years.
Awesome.
Even though I wasn't classically trained, I would say that's the point in my life where I really started to get an education in this business, and so she hired me, and literally that's when I started to finally learn about, give names to processes and names to sauces and names to things that I had been using for decades,
Right.
without the actual names and knowledge of these things. And so from that point, it was just a matter of, learning from different chefs and stepping stone from point A to point B. I made my way to chef and chef de cuisine, and then executive chef. And then finally, the last job before my current position was with a company that I worked at for 20 years, where I was the corporate executive chef for 5 restaurants, and kind of got to oversee those menus and really kind of expand on that.
And was it like a chain, or was it like 5 different concepts in a way?
I would say more the latter. It was owned by 2 gentlemen, and they kind of basically purchased the restaurant that started in Seattle called the Icon Grill, which is no longer around. And they purchased it kind of already. It had been going on for a couple of years, and then they grew it, and they took that concept and me, and then they started to grow their concept to include other versions of similar. So I was overseeing the menus kind of for multiple different concepts.
Awesome.
Nice.
And then, of course, I found my life at Bargreen.
Yeah. That's like, how did you get into that? Like, none of us probably woke up and were like, "Oh man, I can't wait to sell restaurant equipment one day."
Oh yeah. I work for a company called Bargreen Ellingson. We're a restaurant equipment and supply distributor. So we're kind of the go-between, or we're the final before the customer for you folks, obviously. And I know you guys know this, but and so I have been a customer of Bargreen for literally in 1986 when I first moved to Seattle. I was a Bargreen customer. 30 plus years I have been on the customer side. Paul Ellingson, who is he's no longer the president of the Bargreen Ellingson. He's like the chairman of the board for their board. I've known him for decades. And so he reached out to me and said, hey, let's have lunch. And so I said, sure, let's have lunch. And so we sat and had lunch. And so he was the one that said, hey, Bargreen has not had a chef in 5 years, and they had 3 test kitchens at that time. And he felt that it was a missed opportunity within the company to not have that role filled. And he felt pretty adamantly that I was the guy for the job in terms of being able to kind of fill that role. We spent a good month talking about kind of the vision for what this position looked like. And then they made me an offer, and I accepted. And I've been here for it'll be 8 years this year now. So
congratulations. That's great.
And I have to tell a story because this is about Robert.
Uh-oh.
Please do
it. Make it as colorful as possible.
We want every detail.
So Robert, I hold a special place in my heart for Robert because he was one of the very first supplier vendors that I had been introduced to. Literally one of the very first.
Yeah. Well, I was a corporate chef at that time.
For a manufacturer, right?
Right.
Before I had actually started the position at Bargreen, David Ellingson reached out to me. He said, hey, are you open for a training trip before you actually start? And I said, yeah, sure. I was totally open to it.
Mm-hmm.
We'll fly you to Wisconsin to actually go to Altosham and learn about some of the equipment that you're going to be working with when you actually begin your position.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, I didn't know what I didn't know because I had no idea what I was getting into. Nothing.
Right.
Yeah. And you probably didn't even know how the whole business process worked.
Nothing. I knew nothing.
Right.
So when I walked into Altosham, I had no expectation, but no fear. And B, I didn't recognize kind of who I was in terms of your guys' world, the rep world. I didn't understand my role at all. And so when I walked in, I was introduced to multiple rep chefs from all around the country that were doing training there. When I did that, I was like, okay. And they're like, well, who do you work for? And I said, oh, I work for Bargreen Ellingson. And they seemed a little confused. And
right.
I said, we're kind of based out in the Northwest. We sell equipment. And they're like, oh, they said, so you're a distributor chef. And I said, I guess, yes.
Yeah. Right.
And they said, and so that's when I started to learn. They actually explained to me, you're kind of a unicorn in this side of the world, and that there's a ton of rep chefs. There's a ton of them, because that's the work you guys do, right? Related to your companies. They said, but there's not a lot of me's because I technically do what you guys do, but for everything that we sell. And so that's when I started to learn, and then honestly was thrown into the deep end in terms of training,
right?
Because, Altosham did a fantastic job of kind of have the process down where they were teaching us what we needed to know. And I was like taking notes. I'm like, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm doing. And of course, and I don't know whether they still do it, but they put you in front of the equipment, and then suddenly you're turned around and you got to pretend like you're selling, and you got to turn that information that you just learned around and regurgitate it as if, and of course the Robert and his team, they were awful at it in terms of making you feel bad. They're like being the worst customer in the world, so that wanting you to answer questions that you have no idea what the answers are. So
that sounds about right.
But Robert did a great job. I really meeting him and that team was great. It was a great kind of introduction to what would become my future life then, what I do now. So
by setting you up for failure, we set you up for success.
Yeah, correct. Exactly. That's a good way to put it.
Do you have other little chefs that you work with out in your field? Are you just it?
I am it.
You have to travel to different states, Canada, right? I think you were mentioning Canada the other day.
Yeah. Yep. I'm it. So what's different is about my world versus your world. And I think, well, and maybe it's not, maybe it is true. So I don't know whether you guys are there's salespeople within your organization that sell.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But I don't know do you sell? In other words, are you responsible for selling?
We're like the nail in the coffin.
Right. But do you have sales goals that you have to achieve?
For the culinary team, no, not really. No.
No, I mean there's the company goals, and
Right.
we're part of attaining those.
But you don't have an expectation on you personally.
Right, correct.
Yeah, so I'm kind of the same, and that was the challenge I think with this company, was trying to get their brain around the idea of me being, I'm getting a salary with no monies attached to my
Right.
my what I actually achieve. And so initially that was kind of one of the challenges they really had to get over. But now they're totally supportive on what I do. They get it now, where it's like, yeah, we get it. Nick makes money, but he doesn't.
Right. It's
You
hard
can't
to
necessarily
quantify
track
where the
exactly
money,
what he's
right.
doing that's affecting the sales.
Yep.
And so it's good. Now, to answer your question, Ryan, as we grow, because like right now we're kind of similar to you guys, although right now there's a chef in every one of your test kitchens, right?
Yep.
So for me, I have 4, but we're not quite over the hump where they're willing to start to do another chef, although I'm pushing.
Okay.
I definitely, when I started the job, it was always my goal to have 5 years was my goal to have a second chef in other locations, so that we have the capability to kind of do the things that I do in multiple spots.
Yeah.
COVID kind of put a kibosh on that, at least initially. I think the
Right.
goal is still to put that there, because we have additional kitchens that are going to be coming in online in Denver, potentially as early as this year. And then also in Vancouver, although our Canada location, although that one will be probably smaller and ventless, so it's not quite as robust in terms of what the other ones are.
Nick, where do you have kitchens currently?
We have kitchens in Tacoma, which is where the corporate office is, Seattle, Portland, and then when we acquired Bint's Restaurant Supply out of Salt Lake, we acquired theirs. They had one as well.
Okay.
So we have 4 now.
Yeah, I've worked in the Salt Lake City one a couple times now. I've done a couple demos there, and
Good. Thank you for that.
yeah, you're welcome.
We're glad that you're using it. That's definitely what it's there for sure. When we acquired it, it was not getting a lot of use. It was kind of a catch-all.
Mm-hmm.
But I think now that we don't, now that we've had it for a while, we've definitely changed and upgraded. And we've got a couple of staff members there that kind of are the stewards of the kitchen to make sure it stays clean and organized, because obviously I'm not spending a ton of time there. So
Yeah, right. Or nor could you, right?
right.
Yeah. Going back to you being a unicorn, I think you were the first dealer chef to actually go through our training program.
I mean, to be honest, I used what I learned at that training every day.
Oh, you still have the book, the old notes? Wow.
Wow.
Look at that. Nice.
You. Look at
Yeah,
you.
all my old notes here. Look at all these notes I took.
God, Robert's so mean. I don't want to be around him ever again.
They never set any expectation, but when they gave us the book and the information started coming at me, I was like, holy shit, I got to write this down.
Yeah.
I'm not going to remember all this.
Yeah.
Right.
And you have probably notebooks filled with all other stuff, because you have to know every piece of kitchen equipment almost.
Well, within the first, okay, here it is again. I'm going to do another I didn't know what I didn't know story. So I had literally within a month or a month and a half of starting the job, one of our salespeople reached out to me and said, hey, could you do a demo for Oven X?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, sure. And so I had no idea, none, what I was really getting into. So I pulled up the information. I saw the model. I did some recursory look on it. And then when I actually did the demo, I was terrible. Terrible. Oh.
Glad to hear I'm not the only one.
Well, and I didn't let that affect me, though. I literally went in and said, that's okay. We're going to figure this out together. We're going to get down to the brass tacks. We're going to make this work for you and figure out how we can make it function for what you need. And since then, I'm a little better at kind of doing the homework ahead of time.
Right.
Yeah. Even though you didn't know everything, you still knew more than the person walking in the door to see it.
That's true.
Right. So you were still the expert in the room. And then, I mean, it's like, that's kind of what we do. We don't oversell anything. We figure it out, and we just cook. And, every once in a while, like yesterday, I was having troubles downloading programs off of the cloud to put on a USB into an oven where I was doing a startup. And it's because the way it was downloading, for some reason, it was downloading zipping it, and I couldn't get it to unzip. So it never registered. So I just had to manually program everything in. But, nobody cared. And as long as I wasn't freaking out, the customer was like, yeah, it's all good. As long as we get the recipes in.
And sometimes they like that.
Now we know there's two ways to do this.
Right.
And sometimes if you mess up, the customer's like, no, that's good for me to see. Because then when I'm doing something with my staff, I could be like, don't do this, do it this way.
Yeah.
And then you play it off, be like, that's why I did it.
I say this sometimes when I'm doing a training, especially I think as equipment becomes more, not complicated, but more programmable and more like a computer every day.
Yep.
Is I always tell folks, I said, often there's ways to come in to get what you need to do from different directions. So don't think that this is one way to get in or to do a thing. You can always do it from another way too. I think your technology folks, as they create the interface, recognize that or do it automatically,
right,
so that you can come in from a different point to achieve the same result.
Like a back door, right? Like a different.
Or the people think about things differently, right? So you don't have to necessarily say go to step 1, step 2, step 3. You might say, go to step 3, and then you can add step 1 in later, or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
Some people just think about those things differently.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Yeah.
I want to talk more about your music.
Oh, okay.
I think last time we saw each other, you had just made a new instrument, or you just restringed your, I don't even know the name of it.
for the annual meeting?
Yeah, totally.
Oh, so we had our yearly training. The theme was kind of League of Legends, or it was kind of all a fantasy, Middle Earth kind of stuff. And so literally one of the nights I came dressed as a bard, and I had and I brought my my mandolin. I was playing my mandolin. I was dressed as a bard, and I brought my medieval fiddle, which I think maybe is what you were talking about, Ryan, because I was talking the story about. I have this. It's called a rebec, and it's a medieval fiddle, and you kind of place it under your arm and you play it.
That was it.
And I had I talked about I saw this in college. I was at a medieval festival back in the day. I was walking around, and one of the vendors was selling instruments, period instruments that he had made. And one of them was this rebec, and that nobody had ever heard of. But it just so happened I had, for some reason, shown up and picked it as something I wanted to do a report on for college, for music school. And I don't know why. I saw it in a book or something, and so I wrote this whole report on it. And so then when I'm walking by looking at it, I said to the guy, I said, you have a rebec there. And his mouth fell open, and he's like, how do you know what that is? And I said, well, and I told him the story. And so, of course, I'm a poor college student at the time. So I'm looking at this, and it was couple $300 for this instrument, and that was like, I was like, no way. And I don't know how I scrambled enough money together to buy this instrument from this guy, but I did. And so I still have it to this day. But the funny part is, in the story I think Ryan's alluding to, is that years later, now it's like decades later, and I had opened it up one day because I was going to go to a medieval fair or do something, and the bow had broken. And so the guy had made a bow. And so it's not like a standard like violin or viola bow where it's kind of long and thin. Yeah. It's actually the Baroque style, or the medieval style, where it's more like a literal bow. So it's like it's got a curve to it. And then they use horsehair, and it's kind of tied on one end and it goes to the other side. And it kind of bends the wood. And so that's how you play it, even though it's got this kind of arc to it. And so it had broken. And so I was like, oh, geez, what am I going to do now? And so I tried to glue it, and it wouldn't stay. And I said, oh, geez. So and it's not like you can go on Amazon to pick up a rebec bow. It doesn't exist. Trust me, I tried. And so I looked at it, and it was literally a piece of wood. And then horsehair you can purchase on Amazon.
I was just going to ask, where do you got a special horse guy?
that you can buy super easy.
Black market stuff. Right?
So I'm looking at this bow, and I said, I think I can make this. And so I went and I got a piece of redwood, and I took the broken bow. I'd kind of taped it together. So I put it over the redwood, and I kind of drew out the shape, and then I took and I cut out the shape. And then I took and I sanded it down, And I literally, once it was done, side by side, it looked exactly the same as
Wow.
the other one. So Ryan, that bow was the one I made, and I took the horsehair and I tied it on one end and pulled it to the side, and it works great now. So
That's so
That's
cool.
but once again, I didn't know what I didn't know, right? So I just went in. I had no fear. I said, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to make it happen. And when it's true with us, right? With our job, this is what we do.
It is.
Yeah.
We go
This is
in and we
very
just
true.
dig in and we figure it out. We just kind of rip things apart and let's make it work. And if that didn't work, throw it away. We're going to make it again. And
Yeah.
so
Mhm.
How long have you and your band been playing for?
the orchestra has been around for about 30 years.
Nice.
Yeah, so we're actually celebrating next year. We're celebrating our 30th anniversary for performance, and I've been with them for about 27 or 26 years.
Okay.
Yes, what an accomplishment.
My son is 22 now, and there was a time when he was born until was about 16 that I didn't play. I still was really good friends with all the folks that I knew there, and I'd play chamber music and that sort of thing, but I wasn't playing with the symphony at that time. So, but once I started at Bargreen and I wasn't working a regular restaurant kind of schedule, then I was able to go back and start playing music again. So I've been back again for as long as I've been at Bargreen. So 8 years now I'm back again.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's nice too, though. Kind of what people are always asking, like, what do you do? And it's kind of like, we do chef consulting, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But it's kind of a dream job for us in a way, where it's like we still get to deal with kitchen people. We still get to cook good food and do events and stuff like that. We just don't have to worry about all that other stuff of labor, food costs,
Staff.
who's not gonna show up to work today,
Right.
who cut
right.
their finger.
I tell people that I feel very fortunate to have my job. I love Bargreen as a company, and I love what I do. It's to your point, Ryan. It's so true. It's like all of the kind of joy and passion of cooking without a lot of the other stuff that comes along with it. It's awesome. I tell folks, I said, I really wish I had known earlier that this side of it existed, because I probably would have pursued it had I known. Because I've always been a real advocate of education, both for my staff and my team over the years as I'm teaching people this.
Yeah.
And I feel like I have a pretty good affinity for it, my ability to kind of, identify people's abilities to learn and grow and that sort of thing. And so to have it where I can do it kind of on a daily basis, either with our sales team or with our customers, is great. I mean, it's a great place for me to be. But then I remind myself that the reason I got the job that I have is because of all of the years of regular restaurant experience that I had.
Mm-hmm.
And that had I started earlier, it may not have been the transition probably would have been fine, but I think the 40 plus years of being in the restaurant business normally, it really helps me in my day-to-day life now in terms of, what I know and what I've learned and what I can help with.
Yeah, you bring up a good point there, Nick. For many, many years, back when I was in Milwaukee, I would go to the culinary school. Because it was the same one that I had graduated from. And so I knew everybody, and they would invite me back just to, like on career day, when, the hotels are showing up and the restaurants are showing up and they're trying to get kids ready, and get them when they're going to graduate and all that. But they just would have me talk about the other side of the business and some of the non-traditional chef jobs out there of
Mhm.
corporate executive chef for a manufacturer, rep chef, dealer chef, even talking about, where you've got the B&I chefs. And there are so many jobs out there that they don't even talk about in a lot of the schools, because everybody's just focused on, I'm going to be, the next, 3-star Michelin chef, and I'm going to do this. And, they know that there's hotels, but they don't know all the stuff that's going on within those and all the other avenues of where you can take these jobs and, get to a point where you've got a retirement account, you've got insurance. If you want to have a family, Luke's a perfect example of going corporate for chains. Now he can pick his kids up. He can take his kids to, sporting events, and there's a whole lot of other stuff out there.
Hey, we got swimming practice later on today, just so you guys know.
Yeah, it's definitely it's a good world. I love it. But like I said, would I have been able to do it right away? Yeah, probably. but the trajectory would have been different. And now I feel it was good to have all those years of experience to kind of fall back on in terms of giving. And I think it's good too to remember what it was like to be on the customer side, to
Yeah.
feel their pain
Mhm.
about staffing and equipment and results and kind of all the things that they're looking for. Is you can look at them and go, I get it. I was there.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
understand what you're going through right now.
Well, you fit right in with, we always say we don't sell equipment, we sell solutions. So,
Yeah, for sure.
and I know it's the same thing with you. The first time you meet that kitchen person, it's like, so tell me what's going on. What are the challenges? What are the pain points? What's, where are things getting bottlenecked? What's sticking? And, and sometimes you start to even uncover stuff they hadn't even thought about
Mhm.
because they're so focused on their day to day and everything that's going on. And all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah. And you start uncovering more stuff. And then that's when we start having fun. And it's
Right.
like, okay, now let's start cooking and let's start hitting these things and, let's figure this out.
The good news is on this too is I think that it's a two-way street. I find I learn a ton from our customers
Oh
that
yeah.
that I don't even expect. So that like they're creating solutions whether they realize it or not that I sometimes will take and apply to another customer. Well, I'll say, hey, I had a customer that kind of figured this out
Yeah.
that maybe you could try to see to solve a problem that you have with something.
Mhm.
I do like that too. Like when we do cook stuff in it and burn it and things like that, like customers like, thanks. I am human.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, also then it's like you see the power of the equipment.
Right.
I can dial it back. It's like, if you burn something in a saute pan, well, you had the burner turned up too high. I know how to fix that. If it burns in an oven, it's like, oh, I need to either adjust the temperature or the fan speed or, cut back on the time. And by looking at that, you go, oh, one of those three things I'm going to change. And, then it works out.
And combi ovens are so advanced now. And like we talked about earlier, cooking technology in general is just coming out of nowhere with all this stuff. And it's just like, we got to learn it too. And
Yep.
customers are like, I don't like, some people still are like, I don't know what a combi oven is. And
Right.
like, that kind of blows my mind working with them so much now. But now we have that opportunity.
Perfect segue, Ryan, for setting this one up for me, teeing it up.
You're welcome.
Because my next question to Nick was, since you joined Bargreen to now, what are some of the biggest changes you've seen with equipment?
The biggest changes. Well, some I guess
Or unique changes or just changes with equipment.
Well, so I would say the writing on the wall was there even 8 years ago when I first kind of was exposed to the environment. Whereas the things like the kind of connectivity between equipment wasn't there yet,
Okay.
but
Mhm.
everybody talked about it. It's like they knew it was headed that direction. Whereas I think now we're actually kind of feeling it.
Right.
The ability to kind of obviously connect remotely in a more efficient way, but also connect the equipment
Right.
together. One of the
Yep.
things that I thought was really cool and that I've seen multiple times over the past few years is the ability of the techs to be able to access the equipment, both in terms of kind of anticipating problems
Right.
before they show up at your door. So they
Yep.
already have parts available or they kind of know ahead of time what they're doing. Boy,
Yeah, they're remoting in and figuring it out. Yep.
right. In the day, if you had the ability, if your tech had the ability to kind of go, hey, I know it's going to be this thing, and so I'm already ready to go, instead of having to go
Mhm.
show up at the place, figure out what it is, and now I got to go find the part or whatever it happens to be. Now that technology is pretty amazing, I think, to be able to do that. I'm interested, robotics has been kind of interesting, although it's still, I think, in its infancy. We're not seeing it kind of
Yeah.
in the real world as much as I think people had hoped for at this time, although there's plenty of it out there. So that's kind of cool to kind of see that kind of grow and change. We had locally here in the Seattle Tacoma area, we have there's a robotics company that in downtown Tacoma. And so we had been kind of working with them because they wanted to kind of tap into the idea of what they could do for kitchens. And ironically enough, not on the cooking side, but on the kind of the maintenance side. And so they're, as a robotics company, they had talked to us about kind of how they approach what they do. And so they call what they do the 3 Ds. So what they do is they create robotics that are things to replace people for things that are dirty, dangerous, and dull. I think is the last one. So those are the 3 Ds, right?
Okay.
So when we were talking to them, we started to kind of say, well, at the time that we were having conversations, they had already had a burger, they had a burger cooker and they had a fry robot, and they were talking about like fried chicken and pizza. Obviously, there's a pizza robot. There's all these other robots that are cooking and making food, but nobody had ever really delved into the idea of a dishwasher. In other words, again, that was the dirty, dangerous, and dull was somebody, or at least a functional piece of equipment that's behind the dish station that can now, with the technology, with ocular technology, be able to identify a plate or a cup or a whatever it is, to move it and actually rinse it with high-speed water and put it in a rack and actually put it through the dish station.
Wow.
And so one of the
offload too?
Theoretically, yeah. So the way the way they anticipated it was to put this kind of robotic arm on the ceiling. And so then what it would do is it would be able to come down and actually do the movement that a dishwasher would. Potentially could rinse with the same robot arm, and could functionally push the racks through and actually lift the racks and move them into a place. So yeah, it was kind of fun to be a part of that, because I helped solve problems that they didn't anticipate. Like, one of the problems they didn't think about was, well, it's hard for a robot to put a glass because it can't see the glass, because the glass is transparent. So it has a tough time looking through it. Can't really see it. And so we were kind of trying to figure out what it could do to kind of solve that problem. And I said, well, I think we're kind of trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist here. And they're like, well, what do you mean? I said, well, in most restaurants, the servers are putting the glassware in the racks.
Yeah, that's
the
true.
robot doesn't have to see the glass. It just has to see the rack.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So once the rack is full, the server puts it to the other side, and now the robot can just pick up the rack and put it on and push it through. It doesn't have to worry about.
That's genius.
I know. Well, so once again, this is the kinds of things. So it was very fascinating. Now it's right in its infancy again, because they realize that, think about how many different pieces there are in a restaurant in terms of washware.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Hundreds for sure, but thousands in some cases, right? Especially depending on the number of kind of sizes of plates and, different shapes and all those things.
Yeah.
All of those things need to be programmed exactly for the robot to be able to understand kind of how to pick it up, how to hold it, where to put it, where it goes, whether in a rack or whatever it happens to be. And so eventually it should get there. And I would argue AI is probably kind of the next addition to that piece that can start to kind of solve those problems as it gets more kind of, important. And, our customers deal with staffing issues, correct? So the dishwashing position is the one that tends to be kind of the linchpin. If you had the ability to have a machine that was doing that work for you, or at least part of that work for you, boy, that's a game changer. What they were hoping to do too was create it kind of like like an eco lab situation, where it would be possible for a company to lease the robot, and that the company would maintain the robot's ability to function and do all of the back work, and that the restaurant basically leases that robot to do the functionary job, but they don't have to actually buy it. And so now, once again, it's still in the process, so nothing's finished, but I think that's the hope and the goal at some days, to be able to kind of take that to the next level.
Yeah, it's like cool and terrifying at the same time.
Right? Put AI and robots together, it's Skynet. We're there.
Yes. It's happening. It's happening. We should have listened to Arnold.
Yeah. You ever have a chef throw a plate or a pot at you before? Imagine if a robot was doing it. That
I think that'd be a little
terrifying.
bit more dangerous. Oh my gosh.
So funny.
So Nick, our roles, right? Like, and your role, like there's obviously some overlap. And so I'm curious, like how do you interact, or how do you see like your role interacting, I would say, with our types of roles at the rep chef level? Because I mean, I can only imagine, you work with a lot of us, right? I mean, not just the three people that are on this call. And I know I've communicated with you before, but there's other rep groups out there. They have chefs. You've already talked a little bit about the manufacturers, but I'm curious, like, what's that relationship like? How do you see that working?
So it's kind of a game, and I think where my role differs from you guys is that I have to play the political game probably more often than you do, in terms of kind of juggling. All you guys are great in terms of being fountains of knowledge for me and assistance for me, which is awesome. Whether it be you three or the same kind of folks from other companies.
Right.
And so what I often try to do is kind of utilize all the information that you guys provide, both for myself, teaching me, but then also having the opportunity to put you guys in front of our customers when they need to see something. So I think the challenge comes on my end is my ability to, and I have to be cautious on this because sometimes I have to put competing pieces of equipment in front of a customer when you guys aren't around, because I have to, and I never once do I put any of the equipment down. My goal is always is to say, okay, here's three pieces. They all do very similar things.
Right.
Let's cook your food and talk about how any one of these might do a better job of what it happens to be.
Yeah.
So it just kind of depends on the role of what a customer, a customer can come to me right away and say, I need an Alto-Shaam and that's what I want. Great. Let's put you in front of one. Let's make the stuff. Let's do it. But then I have another customer that says, hey, I want to look at Rational, Alto-Shaam, and Blodgett. I want to see all three. And I can go, great, let's do that too. So and when I do it in front of you, I just ask you questions and say, what about your interaction with this equipment do you like or you do not like?
Right.
Let me tell you about the things that I know that are good, bad, or indifferent about all three. And just to say, and so it's always my role to kind of be the help them understand the questions that they need to ask to achieve the results they're hoping for.
Right. Yeah.
And obviously there's things under the skin or under the casing of all of this stuff that I try to be upfront with them about. I tell you, the one I learned, Robert, from you was still to this day, I use it, is when I sell an Alto-Shaam to somebody, or I'm talking about the good, bad, or indifferent for different pieces of the same equipment, is I always talk about the probe, the thermal probe. At the end of the day, I'll say, listen, this is the only one that you can immediately correct a problem if the piece of equipment is bad. And just so you know, now that may never happen. Yeah, it may happen once every 5 years. It may happen once a year. Who knows? Yeah. But it can happen. Right. And you need to understand the capability of the equipment and what makes it different from the other piece of equipment. And so,
yeah, you bring up a good point, because people don't always think, what are the true ramifications of something failing on that piece of equipment? A program goes down, a probe fails, something like that. You lose the functionality for HACCP data. You got to babysit the oven now, because you got to set everything. You got to make sure that the people are setting the parameters correctly and not wrong. I mean, there's so many ways things can go south with just something with a very simple feature of the equipment that may not be robust.
Yeah, so that's kind of my goal. Like I said, it's kind of a juggling act a little bit sometimes, is to having the capability. I mean, you guys are kind of, your umbrella of equipment that you sell is here. Well, mine is here.
Yeah.
And so I sometimes have to operate, when they come in with no idea, then I'll have to say, hey, well, let's roll in 4 different things and try them out and see what you think.
Yep.
It's kind of like similar to us, like people would come in and be like, oh, I'm really excited to see this combi oven. And then at the end of the day, it's like, I don't think it's going to be a right fit for you. And that's what you're trying to cook,
And then you push them right into a Converge.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. But you probably see this too, Nick. They come in saying, I want to see X piece of equipment. And you get in there and you're doing your thing. And like you were saying, you're talking to them and asking questions. And all of a sudden you uncover a whole nother need that they weren't even thinking about. And so, like, this happened to me the other day. Somebody came in, they needed a ventless solution because they're going into the basketball arena downtown. And so we're heating up their product and going through everything, and they're liking what they're seeing. And, we're figuring it out. We're doing things a couple of different ways. And then I pulled the chef aside and I'm like, how much salsa do you guys make? And he's telling me, and I'm like, how do you guys make your salsa? And he's like, we got one of those hand punch things from,
punch shoppers there,
right. And I'm like, check this thing out, and I point him to the food prep, my Hobart food prep machine. And I'm like, look, there's this dicing blade and there's this other blade. And it's like, I can do an entire bus tub of salsa in
minutes,
minute and a half.
Yeah. Right.
And then I just wipe this out. I change the blade and then I do the cheese. And I'm like, he's like, oh, that's cool. We got to come back and play with this. And it's like, they didn't even know that a salsa making machine existed.
Right.
Right. The beauty of having a test kitchen, I think, like that piece alone, like we'll get calls. And so this morning, right, I've got somebody here that wanted to look at a griddle. And so we're talking about griddles and, what different sizes and different features they're looking for. And then we get to talking about their menu and their food. And then, but they're here, right? And so they're looking around like, well, wait a minute. I see this. And they're like, well, do you have a toaster? I was like, well, actually, of the few things that we don't represent, that just happens to be one of them. I was like, we can toast stuff with some other things, but then they were like, yeah. And then they start, the wheels start to turn, right? And they're like, well, wait a minute, we're gonna have to replace a dish machine. We're gonna have to replace, some other stuff, and they're just rattling things off. And at that point, it's like, all right, well, now we're talking about 5 or 6 different pieces of equipment. Really just started out with one. So I don't know. Yeah, I love getting people in front of the stuff, because then I think for them at first it can be a little bit overwhelming, but then as they see it and they can touch it and like press buttons and turn knobs, it becomes so much more comfortable.
Yeah, and they start to forward think about what it could become.
Absolutely.
We forget sometimes with our kitchens, I think, how great we have it. I mean, I love when somebody that I've never worked with before walks into the test kitchen and their eyes light up because they're so excited about all of the pieces that you have out, and that everything looks shiny and new, and they love it. So sometimes I love to look through their eyes for the first time and remember how lucky we have it to be able to kind of have all this stuff to work with and play with.
Yeah. The other part of what we do that I think is super, super important is that relationship. And you kind of alluded to the politics that you play, Nick, where, you basically, you tell the honest story of the equipment that it's in front of the people, and, let them kind of help steer them to the right piece, letting them still make their own educated decision. But it's that long-term relationship that, they feel comfortable, like, oh, I want to go back to Bargreen Ellingson. I want to work with Chef Nick because he steered me in the right direction. He didn't oversell me something I didn't need. Yeah, I kind of ran into that yesterday. I've got a really good relationship with a hospital here in town. And I was doing a startup on a piece of equipment. And the chef's like, oh, by the way, I need you to come back in. We're slated for later this year a remodel of the entire patient line. And we need to walk that. And we need to talk about what that should look like and what's the best pieces for that. You become more like a consultant at that point.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what do you want to know about us, Nick? We've been asking you a whole lot of stuff.
I know a lot about Robert, and Ryan and I have interacted, I was going to say, in the past year or so. I think we've done a better job of trying to connect. I know we've been challenged with that, even though we live the closest to each other.
Yeah.
Luke, I don't know a lot about you.
Luke was in a jazz band.
Oh, I think I want to say somebody told me that.
Yeah. I want to say, I think it was like the first time we met, and we talked for like just a little bit, and then we branched off and we kind of went different ways. It was at a conference, I believe. And then somebody mentioned who you were, and then like what you did, and then also your music background. And for me, that obviously that light goes bright for me, right? Because I grew up in a similar path.
Yeah, music is definitely, it's funny. I often, so when I was going to school, when I was still in college, and I wanted to, my major was viola performance. So I wanted to be a soloist or at least a section player for a symphony. But I also wanted to conduct, and so I was actually taking conducting while I was also learning the viola. And even though I didn't continue, I still am liking it when I finally ended up being kind of the top of the top in the restaurants or the restaurant company that I worked for. Whenever I was on the line, it was the same as what I always envisioned being a conductor, is that you're in control of kind of all of the people and the things, and you're kind of standing in the middle and you're kind of orchestrating it all. And it's the same in the kitchen, right? So I always felt like that even though I didn't end up going down that path, I still ended up doing what I enjoyed, which was being in control of kind of this whole kind of orchestration of food and service and processes that was all going on.
Wow, you just took something full circle.
Well, I will just say this. I'm so happy to be a part of this podcast. I think I told Ryan that I've gone in and seen several of them. You guys do a great job. You guys have a great energy, the three of you together. And I feel very fortunate to be a part of it for this one.
Yeah, this was a pleasure. Thank you so much for being on this podcast.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Really, really enjoyed it.
You were amazing.
Thanks. Well, I love all you guys. Keep doing what you're doing and always keep me in the mix if ever you need my assistance. I'm always here for you if you need it.
Well, that was awesome. Me and Nick have kind of started growing a relationship out here and getting to know each other better and better. It's good to hear his full story of how he became up to where he's at and even all of his music knowledge. And I feel smarter today after listening to him talk.
Right. The music piece of it all is so fascinating to me. And I know I said this when we were talking to him, just like, to me, there's always been a connection with the crowd that I was around when I was in music to the crowd that I've been around when I've been in restaurants. And like, there's a similar vibe, and I don't want to say like rock star vibe, but there is a little piece of that, right? Like where you feel like you're somewhat of a rebellious type person. You enjoy traveling, you enjoy sampling the world in lots of different ways. So I love that, I loved hearing that he's still very active in the music scene while, still being a very active chef in the role that he's in. So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's a Renaissance man. I don't know if you guys follow him on Facebook or any other social, but every Sunday morning he posts some obscure album that he has and he's playing that and he's explaining why he's playing that one today. And
oh, cool.
And so it's kind of cool. But yeah, it was interesting hearing his stories about some of the areas where we have similarities in our job, but some of the other unique aspects of his job and how he's made that his own and really succeeded at it.
Yeah.
And now somebody's going to take us out.
Oh, do I have to do the spinny thing again?
You got to do it all, man. Like this is 100% on you today.
I got to move all my stuff around now.
I think you like it. I think there's a little piece of you that's like, you know what? When is he going to ask me? When's he going to tell me to do this?
I got to be careful though, because last time I almost broke my entire everything.
You're the best at it, Ryan. That's why.
Well, it's just because I have a mobile desk.
Yeah, that's part of it. Maybe in the new office I can set up in a different way. I got to think through that. How am I going to do that?
Don't forget to click that subscribe button. That was terrible.
That was not good. Yeah.
Don't forget to click that subscribe button and watch us again. That was pretty good.
It was all right. Never mind.